Welcome to Minnesota Legislative Report, our region's longest-running public affairs program. Lawmakers from Northeastern Minnesota are joining us today for a recap of the week's activities at the state capitol. This is your opportunity to call or email your legislative questions and have them answered live on the air. Minnesota Legislative Report starts now.
Hello and welcome to Minnesota Legislative Report. I'm Tony Sertich and I will be your host again for the 51st season of this program. Our show each week will feature lawmakers representing districts in northeastern Minnesota talking about events and legislation at the state capitol. The legislature's main work this session is a capital investment bill. They do not have to pass a budget this session, but there is a budget surplus. With unfinished business from last year and all 201 legislative seats on the ballot this fall, we will be tracking the next 2 months closely. We encourage viewers to call with your questions for the lawmakers. The phone number will be on your screen, or send an email to ask@wdse.org. We've got excellent guests for our first show of season 51. First, Representative Liz Olson is a Democrat from Duluth, representing House District 7B. She also serves as the Deputy Majority Leader. Welcome, Representative Olson. And Representative Spencer Igoe is finishing up his first term. He's a Republican from just outside of Grand Rapids, representing House District 5B. Welcome, Representative Igoe. Great to have you both here.
Thanks for having us.
So this is the first show of the season. Representative Igoe, it's your first term. Representative Olson, you've been around for a little while. We'll start with you, Representative Olson. Why did you run for office for the first time?
That's a really great question. So my work in Duluth had been primarily around legislative advocacy, so working around issues of homelessness and people needing health care, and I really saw the intersection of when things don't go well, based on what's happening at the state level, how it can really impact people's lives, especially those living on the margins. And so I never anticipated running for office, but I had kind of worked in this realm, but in a different way. And so when the seat opened up, I thought, well, this is just another way to do that exact kind of work, but from the other perspective. And how I talk about it often is I used to be the one that would pack the bus with the people to go down and advocate at the state capitol, and now I'm the one that gets to greet the bus. So just an extension of the work I've been doing basically my whole life, and be able to do it just from a different perspective.
Wonderful, thank you. And Representative Igoe.
Yeah, for me it was, like you, I didn't ever see myself running for public office. I had been working for Congressman Stauber's office, and for me, my passion is public service. I have a degree in public administration. So similar to you, I was working in the background of things. How can I organize and bring people together? And when I had members of the community reach out to me and say, hey, would you consider running to represent your hometown? That felt like my call to service, and I took that and ran with it. And now here I am and loving every minute of it. It's a really humbling and special experience to be one of 5,000 people to ever hold offices like this. So it's pretty special.
That's great. Well, thanks both for sharing. And folks at home, please continue to share with us. Call or email in your questions for our legislators. I'm going to start off with something that hopefully is going to bring us together to start this conversation. You've already made some progress and passed legislation dealing with the issue of Ukraine. Now, this is an international and national issue, but it comes home with the State Board of Investment, and legislation was passed. So, Representative Igoe, why don't you start in talking a bit about the legislation?
Absolutely. This is a really exciting time because I think as a state, we're taking a stance right now. We're not gonna condone this sort of behavior. And our state is acting independently, and I think the rest of the states of our nation are going to follow along with our country, right? But it's setting a new tone. And I think this is really tied to some work I've been doing around mining and around just supply chains. Russia is one of the biggest sources of nickel that comes across our shores when we make anything that requires it. Well, we all know here in northeastern Minnesota, we have one of the largest deposits of nickel in the known world. And I think this step by doing legislation to ban investment in work with Russia and Belarus is also going to contribute to, now let's look at investing here in northeastern Minnesota. And that's a message I'm really trying to couple with this divesting from Russia, is that we can not only divest, but we can invest in ourselves here. That's the sort of hand-up policy that can have economic impacts for our entire state, not only here in northeastern Minnesota on the Iron Range. I mean, it's been said before, one copper nickel mine has the same impact as bringing the Super Bowl to Minnesota for the next 50 years. We can have that right here in northeastern Minnesota. We can lead our state and we can lead the world. And I think that's why this is a great first step at addressing the concerns of environmental destruction, labor standards. We have the best ones here. Let's bring it all home here and stop investing in countries that don't invest in American values.
Representative Olson, do you want to talk about the divestment bill and any other issues that Representative Igo just brought up?
Sure. Well, I'd say, one of the things we do is we listen to constituents, and we know there are, folks from Ukraine living within our own communities and here in Minnesota. And this was an issue I think a number of us heard about, both from like what's happening at the global level, but also just really it's Minnesotans too. And it's we have a number of refugees that also serve in our body, and them it's personal too to talk about what it's like to leave a war-torn country and flee. And so I think it was just really that personal impact and a time for us to really come together in the House and the Senate. And it was bipartisan legislation that was authored by both Republicans and Democrats to come together to divest. And it was a really great piece of legislation that we could get to the governor's desk in this moment. And I think it does, we have supply chain issues and we have a whole bunch of other things. I mean, and I even talk about the idea around refugees and what we do here in Minnesota on that issue. I think it can touch a lot when we talk about this. And we've really, to be honest, just been legislating through some incredibly difficult challenges. You wouldn't think that a war in Ukraine would have such an impact on what we're seeing, but it does, from the economy to issues that Spencer mentioned, but just we've really had a lot on our plates to really deal with. But I'm glad to see that we were able to get this legislation done quickly and done well and done together, Republicans and Democrats, to the governor's desk.
And this specifically divests any sort of investments in the state retirement fund from those countries, is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, great. Bipartisan support. So now we're probably going to take a little turn in a different direction. Some of the unfinished business from last year that are on the front of people's minds, especially around deadlines that are happening for businesses across the state, is the Unemployment Insurance Trust Fund. Significant deficit in that trust fund, needs repayment. The deed has said that there was a deadline of the middle of this month to get that taken care of, and the legislation is yet to be passed yet. Representative Olson, why hasn't that happened yet in the House of Representatives?
We definitely know there's urgency there, but I will start by telling about frontline workers. Mm-hmm. So when we set our state budget last year, one of the things that we agreed to as Republican and Democrats was to, in order to have that state budget, was to take care of frontline workers with our frontline bonus pay. So that, if we're talking about unfinished business and we're talking about deadlines, we start there. And that is one of the things that's well overdue. And so our body is moving that, through, and we are waiting for the Senate to take action. At the same time, we also know we need to take care of businesses, and that's what the UI Trust Fund issue is about. And so we're also moving legislation through our body to take care of replenishing the UI Trust Fund. The deadline is something that can be debated a little bit, that there is the ability for DEED to back pay the businesses. It might be a little bit of an administrative headache, but it can be done. And so we want to make sure that we're not just taking care of businesses, that we're taking care of the workers that kept those businesses afloat. And so that's a priority for our caucus and for the House, is to make sure that we're doing both, which we can do. And so we're continuing to work through both of those pieces of legislation with the idea that we should be able to do both at the same time.
It feels like both of these issues have certainly been coupled together in conversations starting last year as well, Representative Igo. So where do you see the roadblock standing in getting both of these issues taken care of?
I guess I'll talk, the frontline workers bill we already heard in the Minnesota House. And I think the biggest problem holding up moving into the Senate was there's just a few sections in that bill that make it a little difficult to bring everyone together on it. I don't think anyone argues that our heroes, our frontline workers, deserve the pay that they deserve for working and keeping us moving through the pandemic. One of the biggest sticks from my caucus and the Senate Republicans is there really isn't a lot of language in there to worry about fraud. And when we're talking about a bill that is now, it was going to be $250 million, it has now grown to a $1 billion bill. It's a lot of spending. We're already going to be auditing the Southwest Light Rail. We just want to have some lines in there. And that legislation, if you look at the frontline workers bill, if I was to go ask for frontline worker pay, I don't need to prove what my work background was. The Office of Minnesota Management and Budget is just going to be giving me that check. And my concern there is that we would see maybe people take advantage of the system and take money away from the frontline workers. And it's not frontline workers I'm worried about doing that, it's just the bad actors that exist whenever we're talking about a spending bill this large. So I think that's where the hang-up is right there. But then, moving forward with the UI part, I think that was a huge missed opportunity. We should have passed that on day one. That is an issue that there isn't a lot of. We don't have to debate the dollars. We don't have to debate anything on that. It needed to get done so we can backfill it, because we have businesses that are finally starting to get back on their 2 feet. This is hand-up policy we could have passed, and we missed it. My hope that as we go into this next week of legislative session that we can find the agreement through our caucus's leadership and get this bill passed so businesses aren't faced with this tax right now. They don't need it.
Representative Olson, anything to add?
Well, I would just say one of the things when we talk about the UI Trust Fund, but we're talking about small businesses, and we did a lot around grant programs, and I wish I could just run through everything we have done. I just saw a big announcement about programs that have hit across, deed grants that were given to businesses and partners across, and there's ample money that we have put forward. Again, we haven't done as much for workers, and that is a priority. And with the UI Trust Fund replenishing, we're also talking about businesses like Target, who would be set to get millions of dollars from the state after having some of the best years that they've ever had. And so we want to do it well, and we want to do it thoughtfully, and we want to make sure that we're taking care of workers who we haven't done as much for as we've done for businesses over these last few years. But we can do both.
Great. And right now where it stands is it sounds like legislative leaders are in a room trying to iron out some differences. Representative Bygo, where do you think Republicans need to compromise to get this done?
Yeah, I think the first things first is, let's figure out and get that dollar amount set at what the frontline worker bill is going to be. And I think the hard part was, there was a working group working all last summer on this bill. Mm-hmm. They set a number of $250 million, signed papers, agreed to that, and then the bill ballooned to $1 billion. So we have to find a way to figure out where we're going to come together on that issue, because right now there was that agreement. It grew to $1 billion. How do we settle that? Once we can settle the number, then let's start moving it forward. But like I said, we have a passed bill out of the House for that $1 billion, and I just said some of my issues with the bill. So I think, maybe one way to make compromise, and this is me speaking as a freshman member, is if we could add some accountability in there to prevent fraud and make sure that this program is overseen so that our heroes get the money and not the bad actors, I think that would be the great first step at getting this number of $1 billion agreed to and getting money to the frontline workers that deserve it and earned it. Great.
And just like I asked Representative Representative Olson, where do you think the Democrats have to move to find compromise here?
Well, I think that we just have to agree on, we're saying 2.6 whatever it is billion from the Senate is what they're talking about for the businesses. We're talking about $1 billion. It seems like we should be able to do both, and we should be able to have those numbers somewhat match up. And I feel like that's something that we should have that discussion about, is like we could do both, and we should be doing and talking about at the same, roughly the same level.
Great, thank you. And just as a reminder, please call in your questions or email us at ask@wdsc.org. We have our first question from somebody on the line, a big question that we can dive into. What are your thoughts on the surplus, and how do you think it should be spent? And just as a reminder, the state forecast says there's a $9+ billion budget surplus. There's a lot of details to that around inflation being factored in on the revenue side, but not the spending side. Some of it's potentially one-time money with all of the funding that came from the federal government. So a big, hairy question, and so we'll spend some time talking about it. So big and broad, budget surplus. Representative Igo, will have you go first. Thoughts on how to spend it?
Yeah, so I think the first thing we need to keep in mind when we're talking about this surplus is how can we make sure we're creating hand-up policy with it. So if that means giving it back to hardworking Minnesotans, that means giving it back. If that means funding agencies and programs that have been underfunded, that's what we should be doing, but make sure it's everlasting change. I think too often when we get budget surpluses, which is taxpayer dollars, we look at that one-time money, that one-time good we can do with it. And I think we've seen a history, and this is my perspective as a first-time member in the legislature, that money happens quickly, it disappears, and now you have groups, agencies, small governments wondering where the next time is they're going to get money to do something. So I think if we're going to look at this money, we're going to make an actual difference with this surplus that we're faced with, let's look at policy that gives a hand up rather than a handout. And I think there's a lot of different proposals out there, it's whether it be giving it back. Lots of agencies have been underfunded, or programs, right? How can we reinvest into ourselves to bring about prosperity for all of us? So I think that's the key that I'll be looking for and that I've been trying to lead on, is that hand up policy rather than handout.
Representative Olson.
Well, I'd say we know that Minnesotans are facing really urgent needs, and I think that is what we need to prioritize our surplus around. And we need to be smart. The reason why Minnesota's in the position we are in is we do well as a state. We're a good fiscal state in terms of how we manage our money, what we bring in, how we spend it, that we're, in terms of the nation, really looked at for some of our budgeting practices. And so we do well here. So I think given the opportunity we have with the surplus is to think about those needs of Minnesotans, especially over these last few years. We know housing, childcare, healthcare, there's a whole gamut, and people are just having a harder time affording their lives. And so this is a time to use the money that we have and invest in people and invest in those places that, to Representative Igo's point, can have lasting change, that we're making sure people, that we have an economy that works for everybody, that people can have a place to send their kids so they can work at jobs in our region, that we have people can afford the houses in their apartments, and we don't have to see people moving into homelessness as we see the rent help and things starting to dry up. So we need to invest in things for the future, and education is huge. We've seen what our schools and what our teachers and our students have gone through, and that's something we could put money in now that really helps us in the future. So, you know, what we just mentioned, we talked about the Senate has already proposed $2.67 billion of that to go to businesses, and some of them, again, being those larger corporations. And so I think what we want to say is let's not forget about the people who are hurting, who are really hurting and have been hurting for these last few years, and we want to make sure that they can afford just to live their daily life. And so we'll be putting forward our budget this year as we move forward in this process on the House side and really be investing in those ways.
Governor Walz, to that point, has proposed rebate checks and grew that amount of what he would like to rebate back to Minnesotans on a one-time basis in his supplemental proposal. Your thoughts on that, Representative Olson?
I mean, I definitely think that's on the table, and when we saw the number, what it is, I mean, I think everything is out there to be able to give Minnesotans the tools they need to be able to provide for their families, and that I think is definitely still on the table and something that the governor is pushing. We talk about it too, there's a lot of good that can be done in a tax bill. We want to make sure we're targeting our relief to people who need it. So middle income families, low income folks, and you can really do a lot through the tax bill in that too. So we'll be putting forward things on the House side where we'll see, kind of again to target that relief and make sure people can have money in their pockets.
Great. Representative Igo, rebate checks?
Yeah, I'll kind of tie right into what you were saying there, Liz. I mean, I think the tax bill is actually more of a solution instead of the one-time dollars going to people. How could we create lasting tax breaks for our middle class and lower classes? I mean, that is how we give people a hand up to create, buy homes, stay in their homes, generational wealth, build communities, small businesses. If you take that burden, that tax burden off of people, you give them more tools to succeed and have prosperity. And that's where I think we should be spending that kind of money, is in reorganizing our tax structure to give people that hand up. Because $1,000, it is beneficial to people, but unfortunately, it'll just get taxed again and go right back into the coffers when they go and spend things on it. So let's give them lasting tax relief with this instead of $1,000 checks.
Great. Well, speaking of taxes, we have another constituent writing in. We'll start with you, Representative Igo. Is there anything being done to combat rising property taxes in our state?
So this is a question I've been getting a lot, especially for my district. There's a lot of people that, their slips are just showing up this week. I just got the notification, it's in my mailbox. It's something that I've been definitely looking into. I think the first thing we need to look at is it's more of a local government problem first off, right? And that means working with your local treasurers, your assessors, and finding out what actually happened. Property values are obviously rising, but there's a huge problem now because we have people that are on fixed incomes and retired people who now are seeing taxes, rise $100, $200 a month for the property taxes, and that's unsustainable. That's pushing people out of homes. That's getting away from what we were just talking about. So I think there's a balance need to be had there, but the most important issue I can stress on this is work with your local government leaders on this, because they're the ones that have the most control over it. But also, for those listening at home, please look into the state. There is the state property tax refund. If you're within the certain budget or a certain amount made every year, please look into that. That can be a huge solution to be helping some of those middle class and lower class families. And I think that would be huge to look into as well. But right now, please get in touch with your local county commissioners. That is the best place to start.
Representative Olson.
Well, I agree with Representative Igo that a lot of it is at looking at the county and local level around the assessments and what's happening with your taxes, and getting in touch with your county officials is really important to better understand that. But what we can do at the state level is, support our local governments, local government aid, other things that we can be doing so that our local governments maybe don't have to look at that in terms of continuing the increase in the levy and the property taxes, or fully fund our schools so that they don't have to rely on levies in order to be able to fund their basic services too. So the state needs to invest in local governments and invest in schools and invest in those ways so that we can help with some of that. But in terms of the direct amount that people are paying and seeing in their taxes, it's really a good idea to everything Representative Igo said about getting in contact with their local government.
Great. And we're getting a lot of questions from viewers right now. And so we're going to jump on over to a topic that Representative Igo, we're going to start with you again. What is the status of the Environmental Natural Resources Trust Fund registration? Are you familiar with that, sitting on the Environment Committee?
Right. You know, I'm actually not completely up to speed with where that's at in the process right now.
Okay.
We had 3 committee hearings last week trying to get through bills. I don't know if we made it through that one last week, so I'm not totally up to speed. I don't, Liz, if you have any.
I sit on HHS jobs. I could give you a general sense about it, but no, I don't.
Okay,
Nope.
So no further update at this time. Well, Representative Olson, this one you will know about. You have a bill on earned sick and safe time that'll be on the House floor next week. Can you talk a bit about the bill and what it does?
Yeah, great. So earned sick and safe time is something, if you're a Duluth listener, you may be more familiar with. So this is the benefit you earn if you go to work. And so you work for 30 hours, you get an hour of time on your time card. So if you're sick or your kid is sick, you can call in sick and still get paid. So this is a benefit that everybody in Duluth has, or most everybody, because we have passed a city ordinance, as has Minneapolis and St. Paul, and there's other states that have done it at the state level. But there's about 932,000 Minnesotans that don't have access to a single hour, day, anything off if they're sick or their family is sick or a loved one, to be able to call in, to go to a doctor's appointment, to get a shot, get the COVID vaccine, to stay home if you had COVID. And so we have a bill that we have brought forward in the House for several years trying to get this across the finish line, and the Senate has never taken action on it. And so we will once again be bringing this to the full body on Monday and tomorrow, and we'll be taking a vote on it again because we are in a pandemic, which is just honestly like mind-blowing to me as a mom, as just a human, that we just don't have this in our state, this earned benefit. That, like, how could you even get through your life, having to make that terrible choice of like, do I try to sneak my kid into daycare sick with a fever because I can't call in sick to take a time off to take care of them? Like, people do that in our state. Like, it's just unbelievable to me. So again, we'll be bringing this bill forward. Again, it's an earned benefit that employees would have to work. There's a number of parameters to make sure we're supporting businesses and making this happen. It's not a costly thing for the state to implement, so the time is really now to get this done.
Great. Representative Igo, thoughts on the bill?
So your bill is on my reading list tonight to be ready for tomorrow. But my kind of take on it, and you raised a lot of good points. My concern right now, however, though, is when we're talking about statewide policy at this level, how is this going to affect smaller businesses if they're going to be mandated to have to, pay into more fees? And I think the thing is, there's a lot of small businesses that are already doing this on their own, which is good. And I think that shows how the free market really can work to create the best business and working climate for everybody. So I'm afraid right now that in a time where it's hard to even get workers right now and everyone's struggling, that adding another, is essentially another tax to a business to have to pay for this, it could really limit our economic growth in a time we're trying to recover from a pandemic. So I see the concern there, and I know it's a huge problem, especially in our greater Minnesota communities, but I also know that our mom and pop shops know best how to work with their employees through times like this. So I'm just afraid of large blanket policy, again, working across the state and affecting communities differently. So I think we need to maybe take a step back on something like this, let us continue to fully recover from the pandemic, and then hear from mom and pop on Main Street about what they actually want the bill and the plan to look like.
As the author of the bill, you get the last word.
Great. So, and I would say one of the things that it does too is it keeps employees in the market. Like, we already know that we have, where we're at, that there's a shortage of workers. One of the things, workers need benefits. So this is a benefit to businesses, it's a benefit to workers, and it's really a win-win, and it has worked in the places it's been implemented.
Great. Another question from a viewer asking about the liquor bill. If either of you know your thoughts on the liquor bill or where it's at, Representative Olson?
I do, actually.
Okay.
This is a niche thing. I never thought I would work on liquor policy, but here I am.
There you are.
So this was a big deal. We actually have reached a compromise with a bunch of the liquor stakeholders, but this is a big deal for Duluth. And this is why I started working on this, is because if you've driven through Lincoln Park, if you've gone into Canal Park, you have seen that just the complete change of Duluth in terms of the craft. And so we have distillers and brewers that are looking to grow, and our current liquor laws are well behind the times. And so what we're able to do now through a compromise and lots of work by a bunch of different people is to actually get to a point where the stakeholders have come together and agreed to make some substantial changes. So now, like for example, if you went to Ursa Minor tonight after the show to get a beer, you would not be able to buy a 4 or 6 pack of beer. But you could go to the liquor store down the street and you could get a 6-pack of Ursa Minor beer, but they're not allowed to sell their product. Well, thanks to, again, knock on wood, nothing's done yet, but it's looking like we'll be able to get to a place where they will be able to sell 6-packs. Same if you go to Castle Danger and you try to refill a growler tonight, you can't. Because they hit a limit of the amount they could do for growlers. That's going to change with this bill. Same if you go down to the distillery. I could talk forever on this. But if you go to Vikra and you tried to buy a bottle of their gin down there, you would be limited on what you could do, and this will give them the opportunity to be able to sell their product directly to the consumer. So this is a good deal. I mean, I hear about it from people in the community, people who come for their vacations here. So this is a really big deal, not a small feat to get a bill like this done. And so it's not across the finish line, but it's looking very promising. So more promising than it has been in the 6 years I've been here.
Well, you talked about a couple of my favorite places to go. I also know there's a couple of great breweries in Itasca County as well. Representative Igo, any thoughts on the liquor law?
Hearing from the breweries in Itasca County, I've been kind of getting up to speed on this issue. This has been an issue you've been working on, 6 years now already? I mean, this issue first came up. In Minnesota, from what my research, we have some of the most archaic and outdated liquor laws in the entire country. And it's time we get up to speed with those things. So I'm really excited to hear that we've reached those compromises and moving forward. It's going to help those small business breweries and distilleries in greater Minnesota grow, and I think that's the biggest thing, right? I talk about Rapids Brewing in Grand Rapids. If they want to do like a tap takeover and move kegs to Clockow, they can't legally do any of that. And that's kind of crazy to me. They're a mile and a half away from each other in our downtowns. It's good we're going to be fixing these things. Hand up policy.
Well, it's a Republican, the liquor law, it's like the Wild West, we completely agree.
Yeah, I know, right?
Yeah. Sounds like more research needs to be done at these places too, so I'm happy to join in that anytime as well. Representative Igo, we were going to highlight one of your bills now too. You're authoring and received a hearing this week in the Public Safety Finance and Policy Committee on safety telecommunications and 911 dispatchers. Do you want to talk a bit about that bill?
Yeah, absolutely. This is a bill I never imagined I'd be working in public safety when I went to the legislature. This is a bill that actually started in my community with my sheriff's department. So it was brought up to my attention last year that our public safety telecommunicators, our dispatchers, right, when you call 911, they had no sort of safety standards, certification, continuing ed. It was kind of the Wild West across the state. Every county could handle it their own way. So last year, I got a working group put together with all the different, agency heads, different interest groups. Everyone came together and wrote what they wanted their standards to be like. So now I wrote the bill this year to give them their standards and certification. That bill is just heard this week. It's going to be a great, great fix to making us all safer here in Minnesota. So when you call 911, you're going to have that confidence that that dispatcher is fully trained, knows what they're doing, and can be the first to help you on the scene. A lot of people don't realize that. It's not your police officer or your firefighter on the scene first. It's your dispatcher, right? They're the one talking you through on the phone, calming you down, saying, okay, police and fire is on the way. Don't worry, an ambulance is on the way. So this is a great way to start giving attention to a group of people that have been keeping us safe a long time and are now going to get the standards they need to keep doing their jobs correctly.
Sounds great. Anything to add, Representative Olson?
I also am not on public safety, so I trust it's a good bill.
Great. Couple more tax questions popping in here. The first one is a little longer here. We'll start with you, Representative Olson. How do you feel about a homestead proposal that would be an aid to seniors that have reached the age of 65 and have homesteaded their property for a period of at least 10 years? And they get into the details about valuation and how it would work. But a homestead proposal to raise aid for seniors who've lived in their home for a longer period of time.
I mean, just hearing constituents bring the best ideas forward, and that's a lot of how we legislate, is we hear things directly from people in the communities who have ideas. That seems like a really great idea, and I don't know where they live or who their representative is, but I would say to get in touch, to email your representative and senator with that idea. I think that is something worth looking into. Again, helping people who need the help. And I think that's, seniors and people that have been in the homestead who've been in their homes for a while, I think that's a great idea to pursue. I know kind of on the flip side, we've been talking about how are we helping renters too, and one of the things that you used to have to, and we're trying to change this year, is when you do file for your renter's credit, you'd have to do a separate set of, if you meet with your tax person, you do it yourself, you'd have to do a separate form, and we're trying to figure out how we could do that at the state level, that it makes it so much easier just to do it on one form to directly help renters. So, and that idea came from renters, saying, it's hard and we're leaving, a bunch of renters leave money on the table because they don't always know or don't go that next step. So again, why constituents and bringing the ideas forward is so important. It sounds like a great something to look into.
Representative Igo?
Yeah, I'll kind of add to that. I think that's a great step to start looking into how we can help. The seniors, like we already kind of talked about this at the beginning of the show, right? So I believe the homestead tax credit's at $413,000 for your house. So we got to look at, what would that number be then for the exemption to rise for that senior's home. But I think that's kind of your starting point. I think what you said there is perfectly. Constituents build that playbook for all of us to do the things that we're supposed to do out of the Capitol. So whoever your representative is, please reach out and get that idea moving, because I think that's worth talking about, and maybe we can find a solution there.
Great, and keep your questions coming in, call and email. One last tax question for now, and then we'll shift gears. Anybody know the status of Representative Liz Lagarde's bill regarding taxing Social Security?
Maybe we both do. What I would say is I'm familiar with that. That is hot topic. That is very much hot topic. The thing that it's getting vetted within the tax committee, which I don't believe you don't serve on, neither of us do.
No.
So in terms of specifics, but it has a huge price tag. And also same thing, like figuring out like how do we target it to hit the seniors who need it the most. Because there are, really wealthy seniors too who have the ability to perhaps not have need that break at the level that maybe someone who is really struggling as a senior too. And so we're having those discussions to figure out, if and how something like that could move. And again, the price tag to just do it without consideration for income levels is just a huge number that I think we still have to figure out.
Yeah, I'm really excited that this is finally getting the time it needs to be talked about. This is an issue that has been talked about for years. One of the first bills I co-authored and signed on to was to abolish the tax on Social Security in January of last year. So there's a lot of people that have been working on moving this bill for a very long time. And now, with a surplus, this has created the climate for us to really dive in and fix this. This is one of the things keeping people from retiring here in Minnesota. This is why we see people flee and go to other states. We want to keep our Minnesotans here. We want to keep our families here. We want to keep us connected. And I think this is a great proposal we need to really look into. And there's a lot of people on both sides of the aisle that have been working on this. I believe the bill I signed on to was by Representative Juergens from central Minnesota there. So we really got to look into this, and I'm hoping we can get this done.
Great. We're going to change gears now. Representative Olson a while ago brought up education. A significant portion of the state budget goes to education. We'll start with you, Representative Igo. What is being done to address the education system and to provide support to changing school and learning environments?
So, I think this all starts with we passed the largest educational budget in state history last year. That was a great start to getting our schools on track, especially coming out of pandemics. Virtual teachers have been through a lot, gave them a lot of the tools and funding they need to keep moving forward. I think the biggest thing we need to look at now is how can we assist and help local school districts. Let's stop looking at education from a blanket policy, like I mentioned before, a statewide down. Every school district is going to be able to handle their students and knows their communities better. I think about Grand Rapids ISD 318. I think of Greenway. You have two schools that are right next to each other, but operate and run very differently and have different plans for how they teach their students based on what their community wants. I think as a state, if we can look into ways to help out those local education, local school districts, that's how we can help them. And that means less mandates. That means more flexibility for parents to get involved in school boards and to write the policy and work with themselves to levy, rather than always being reliant on state policy to give them what they need. Because a school in Minneapolis is way different than a school in Hibbing. And we got to remember that. And I think by crafting policy to give local control back is front of mind on that right now.
Representative Olson.
I'd say we definitely, education is top of mind, especially with what happened in Minneapolis with just the needs and being brought forward with the strike that was there recently. But I would say, even though we did a great bill last year in a bipartisan legislature, that we were able to do a significant investment in education, it's not where we need to be. We need to make sure that school districts have reliable money, the per pupil amount that they know they're going to be getting, so that you can be planning on it. But we also need to be considering all of the other things that go into, the federal government just woefully, abdicating their responsibility on special ed has just had a huge impact on what we do have to do at the state level. Not to get too wonky, but the cross subsidy around special education and other things are just really hurting our schools. And so we have a lot to do, and it's a huge part of our budget, but it's our responsibility to really make sure that it really is, like, as a state government, it is our responsibility to fully fund our schools. And so we've done good work there, but we have so much more to do. What I'd also say too is we need to make sure we're supporting all of the professionals within the schools. So making sure that our paraprofessionals that we're taking care of in terms of like the amount of money that they're able to get paid is directly related to how much we're able to give schools to be able to keep their benefits up and providing those supports in schools for kids who need them. And so we have a lot we still need to do there. We also need to be talking about mental health in schools. That's a really big one. And making sure that we have the supports kids need there and have adequate mental health services, school-linked mental health that we can bring in, support staff from outside experts where kids can see mental health practitioners right at school. I mean, we just have so much we could be spending, basically our whole surplus on education. And so we have a lot to do there, and I'm hopeful we can do that. But you've already heard between the two of us, we've probably already spent the surplus just in what we've talked about so far, and we haven't even talked about HHS. So there's a lot of need, and the schools are definitely worthy of that need.
Great, and HHS is Health and Human Services.
Yes, sorry, yes,
that's okay.
Lingo.
That's all right. And we've talked about a whole bunch of issues right now. We haven't talked about the main issue why you all come in for this second year. As I talked about at the top of the show, it's not a budget year. So actually, if you don't get anything done, nothing happens. The state doesn't shut down. You passed a 2-year budget last year, so that's okay. But the main reason that the legislature comes in this year is to really consider a capital investment or bonding bill. And that's funding that goes for infrastructure all across our state that has statewide or regional significance. So I'd love to get an update on, first broadly, capital investment bonding process. And then if you could take a moment or two to talk about maybe some of your favorite projects that you're advocating for. Representative Olson, why don't you start first?
Sure. So to everything you said, it's a bonding year. And so given the surplus and the state of how we're doing, like how the state is in a financially good place, we have the ability to take on a pretty big bonding bill to be able to pay the debt service on that. And so we are, on the House side, we would like to see something very robust. The governor has put out his numbers. I mean, we want to be north of $2 billion. We really want to see something great, because it's not just, it seems like boring capital investment. It's roads, it's bridges. Well, it's so much more than that. It's investing in communities, it's investing in infrastructure, it's investing in jobs that go into then taking care of those projects and building out whatever we fund. So it's a great opportunity to put a shot in the arm of our economy and to do a lot. And in Duluth, we're a regional hub. We have a lot of projects. And so Spirit Mountain, for those of you that have been out there, that's a really dilapidated chalet. It really needs some work. I think you're on the, Representative Igo, maybe you're on the bonding committee.
I'm not.
Okay,
no.
I was thinking you'd been and toured it. A number of my colleagues have been up in Duluth. The aerial lift bridge is a big project. We have wastewater. I mean, I could name there's a lot in Duluth because we are a hub that provides a lot of services and has that regional impact. So we have a number of great projects here. Maybe I shouldn't list them all, because if I forget them, then someone who's watching will say you didn't say the thing. But we have a real great opportunity. I'm hopeful we can get a really robust bonding bill done.
Great. Representative Igo.
Yeah,
the size, and then and kind of overall, and then any specific projects you'd like to highlight.
Right. I think kind of along those lines, let's find a number and a bill that works and makes sense. Like you said, if we're going to be north of $2 billion, with all the other stuff we're spending, we're already past that surplus then right there. So we got to make sure that the number is manageable. With me being a first-term member, this is my first time going through the bonding process. So I'm learning a lot. I'm talking to Representative Erdahl a lot, trying to learn everything I can. In my district, I got some exciting projects I've been working on. One of the big ones is the Canisteo. The pit mine there right in Coleraine V. We're working with the DNR because that is a pit that needs some legacy management there. So that's probably one of the biggest bonding bills I'm working on right now, because that is an issue that if we don't get addressed this year, we could have huge problems. But on the flip side of that, I'm also working on some other great, exciting projects. One of them is right outside Duluth. I've been helping with the air base here, trying to get a new hangar for them. That's really exciting. A bigger bonding bill at the surplus. To be able to invest in our military compounds here in the state is really good. Keeps us, it helps Duluth also stay, a hub. Also, City of Grand Rapids is doing a lot of stuff for the school district, as well as City of Cohasset. They're working and trying to do a downtown development project. And for those who have been through Cohasset, they don't really have much of a downtown. So their idea of using bonding and working with other agencies and also developers to build the downtown in their community, especially with closure of Boswell Energy Center in the near future, they need to start diversifying their economy. This is a great step in that, and that's where maybe bonding can come in again with that hand-up type policy to help make a difference there.
Great. A few more questions from viewers. We're going to dip back into those. Public safety is a big topic on these folks' minds. Can you discuss various crime initiatives currently being discussed? And so I'm guessing not crime itself, but preventing crime. So Representative Igo, you want to go first on any of those public safety issues that may be in discussion right now?
Yeah, so I'm not on the committee. My work has been around this dispatching bill. But what I've been hearing from a lot is just the fact that there's just such a need for us to fund law enforcement. And whether that be in helping local departments or whether that be just in recruitment. I think that's one of the biggest things. I am signed on co-authoring, or carrying a bill actually, with Senator Gazelka about getting some money in dollars into our local departments to help with recruiting and training of new officers. I think that's one of the biggest hurdles we're facing right now. After we've seen a crime surge coming out of the Twin Cities, and we need to get that under control. And the first step in doing that is lifting up and supporting officers and training more and new ones. So I think we can start looking into policy like that, but also benefiting and helping to keep those members of our community that keep us safe. Remember that they are heroes too. And I think we need to kill this stigma of, police and fire being bad people. I never thought in a million years, here we are talking at this table where the idea of law enforcement and public safety has been politicized. It should never have been this way. And I think we can work as legislators, bipartisanly to kill that stigma and work on lifting up all officers that keep us safe for what they do.
Representative Olson.
Yeah, so the House has put forward a really big package that actually was just unveiled this week, which is a sort of huge approach from the investing in law enforcement, which Representative Igo talked about, to some of the accountability measures that people want to see in terms of making sure that adequate training and that there's all of those resources, and that there's resources to support beyond whatever crises may bring people into contact with law enforcement, that getting the support for that, but also how do we change and minimize those interactions that lead to some of the things that are really challenging that we've seen in our state. So thinking about how we do policing a little differently and giving supports for places that are doing that and offering and already kind of leading on that, like the Duluth Police Department does a lot and actually comes and testifies often on bills that we have at the Capitol around, because they do have some innovative things they're doing here. And so there's opportunities to lead and grow and both fund and do everything that Representative Igo said, but also put in place some new initiatives, some support to do things differently, and some accountability as we move forward too.
Great, thanks. Another question from a viewer, Representative Olson, we'll start with you. What is being done to address gun violence this legislative session?
That's a great question. And so I'm personally the co-author on 2 pieces of gun violence prevention, which is which in the previous sessions we've been able to move through the House, but have not been met with any action in the Senate. And so this session we have opportunity and things are at the table around gun violence prevention, but we just know we have the same makeup in the Senate, and it's just not likely to be seen. And so we have a number of provisions brought forward, whether it's the background checks, expanding background checks for a variety of things there, or the red flags, so people who maybe are a danger to themselves or to others, that there's ability to maybe have some interventions there so that they don't have as easy access to guns, because we actually know gun violence, it's unfortunate, but it's a lot of suicide too. We think about it as school shootings or mass shootings, but it's also just like harm inflicted to yourself or even people in your home. And so keeping measures like that, which unfortunately we just likely won't see action on. But what we're seeing though is there's some legislation moving around safe storage for firearms, which I think has some potential for bipartisan support. And so we see some of those initiatives happening, and hopefully we can do something. But in terms of kind of the bigger ones that are being pushed by a lot of the gun violence prevention advocates, I unfortunately don't see moving this session.
Suicide, domestic violence, we see data around background checks or polling around background checks that so many people support this. Representative Vigo, what do you see as potential bipartisan opportunities around gun violence?
Well, I think this kind of goes back to what we were just talking about. We need to kill this stigma of anti-law enforcement. That's one of the biggest things, in this debate right now. This gun violence, this rising gun violence is coming out of one city in the state right now, and it's Minneapolis. It's leading the country. And that's due to the fact that we have officers retiring left and right, and you have a city council that doesn't want to support the police. A lot of the things you talked about, Representative Olson, unfortunately don't stop the bad person from getting a gun. And the best person you can put in that line of defense there to stop bad people with guns is law enforcement. Is having a robust law enforcement, whether that be your sheriff's department, whether that be your police departments, community policing. That's how you change those things. So that's why we need to support law enforcement. I think that is probably one of the biggest things we need to invest in is a public safety bill that does that, because unfortunately, creating more and more hurdles that keep responsible gun owners away from guns isn't going to stop the people that are causing all the violence. So I think that's what we need to look into, public safety.
Anything to add, Representative?
I would just say, just going back to statistics, we like to focus, or I don't, but there's certain folks that like to continue to point at Minneapolis, but what we're talking about is something that impacts every community. There was a woman killed in the Chester Park area not long ago by an intimate partner, with access to weapons. And so it's, to the point, it's domestic violence, it's suicide, and the fact that we don't take action is just, it's incredibly hard, and we have to keep pushing. We have to keep not just politicizing the moment around gun violence as Minneapolis, but it's all of these other things that then make it so much harder to take action when we politicize it. So just going back to the facts, I think, is really important.
Last word, Representative Vigo.
Yeah, well, I'll just say I don't think I'm politicizing when Minneapolis is the #2 city in the country for gun violence right now. That's not politicizing. That's stating a fact. I have tons of friends who are still students on the U of M campus, and when they hear gunshots regularly every night, that is not politicizing anything. That is stating a fact. And the fact of the matter is we need to fund law enforcement. We need to work to kill the stigma of anti-police, because police officers don't join a police force to inflict harm. They do it to keep us all safe, and we need to bring that back to society and stop having this be a politicized issue. That's the problem right there.
Great. All right, another question from a viewer. Where do you stand on a proposal to ban non-compete agreements for lower and middle income workers? Are either of you familiar with the topic, and maybe explain a bit of the background? Representative Wilson, you're nodding your head first, so I'll let you go.
Well, my counterpart here, Representative Schultz, I believe, is actually the author of that bill. And it's something I was not aware of, but got a lot of emails from people in the area that actually left the area and weren't able to. They wanted to continue to work in their field, but their person, or the place they worked here, had them sign a no-compete clause, so they couldn't go work for a competitor within a certain area around. So they had to completely leave the area in order to honor that contract. Instead of being able to just work, they wanted to change jobs, seek a different opportunity, maybe get paid more, and their employer had them sign something that said they wouldn't do that. And so they completely left the area. And so I had a number of people actually email me about jobs that they've left because of that. And so I wasn't aware that that was even something that could happen. And so Representative Schultz, and I'm not sure who the other authors are, have actually introduced legislation, and it's moving to ban those no-compete clauses for, and I don't know what the targeted income, but I think the viewer is asking about middle and lower, and I know that that is a part of it, and I don't know how high up it goes, but absolutely I fully support banning those.
Great. And it sounds like this is for maybe restaurants, I've read about in the past, or some of those sorts of jobs. Representative Vigo?
For me, I serve on the Energy Committee and the Environment Committee and Redistricting. I haven't seen a lot of this proposal coming through. This is one of the first times I'm hearing about it, but I'll add it to my reading list tonight to get caught up on it.
There you go. You're going to be very busy tonight, it sounds
always
like.
am.
All right. So something, once again, we're going to come back around to a place where there's a lot of agreement. State Senator David Thomasoni from Chisholm, who I served with, who you currently serve with, was diagnosed with ALS. And there's been a lot of support honoring him. There was an Iron Ranger party every year, and it was in his honor this last year. And legislation was brought forward on his behalf but not just for him, right? For the issue of ALS, where he's been diagnosed, for funding for research in that got broad bipartisan support and is moving forward. Either of you want to talk a bit about that legislation and what that means?
Yeah, it's an ode to his legacy. As a first-term member, I had the opportunity not only just serve with Thomasoni this year, but when I was a staff member working for Congressman Stauber, and I'll just speak to Senator Thomasoni's character on this one. You have a Republican congressman come into a very Democrat-controlled district, and I am the new Republican guy on the range working and trying to show up to these meetings, but Senator Thomasoni always grabbed me, had me sit next to him, and was always cracking jokes with me in the front and making sure I had a chance to speak or introduce me to people. And I think that speaks to what everyone says about him. He was a man that reaches across the aisle and always is trying to make things better. Left quite an impact on me, and it's something I remember when I'm serving now, and this bill, I think, embodies that. The fact that we're going to be putting money into a disease that doesn't always get the limelight, and now it is. And it affects a lot of people. I think there's more people out there than you know that have someone with ALS in their lives that's hurting. I think the fact that Ann knew her husband passing away from ALS, was able to share testimony to how important this is as we're seeing Senator Thomasoni deal with this. I mean, it's really powerful stuff, and I'm glad that the legislature can come together over something like this and say, hey, this is an issue here. Let's rise above the partisanism and let's make a difference. And we did that when we passed that bill through the House and the Senate. It was unanimous in the Senate. I mean, I think that's saying something in itself right there.
$20 million of research, is that correct, Representative Olson?
I think so, yeah. And there's differences between the House and the Senate bill, but we even added an amendment into Representative New Brindley, as he mentioned, was a caregiver herself, to also to address. So we put some funding in for around caregivers too for ALS. So I think, so it's a great bill, and it was really powerful testimony on the floor. Representative Liz Lagarde gave quite a moving speech about Senator Thomasoni and about the importance of this bill and his legacy, and it was a very moving day on the floor for all of us.
Great. Thank you. So one committee that both of you sit on is the Redistricting Committee, and so every 10 years there's a census, and after the census is done, they change the maps of the legislative districts and the boundaries change. Now, the courts had to decide what the district boundaries were again, and that tends to be maybe the norm these days, or the past few times it's happened. I'm not going to get into kind of talking about the past, but I really want to hear from both of you, and Representative Igo, maybe you first. How is redistricting impacting this legislative session politically?
Politically quite a bit. I mean, I think it was like the one quiet day in St. Paul, I think, because the maps came out a little after noon on the 15th of February, and everyone was immediately on their phones, computers, trying to figure out what was going on. Politically wise, we saw shifts all around the state. Especially here on the Iron Range in northeastern Minnesota. I kind of joke, Itasca County kind of became the focal point of redistricting. The county now has 4 different senators and 4 different representatives cutting it up in all different directions, going to Bemidji, going to Hibbing, going to Brainerd, going up to International Falls. And I think you have a lot of people now that are, either had their whole district lost and changed, or you had people that were paired together that are now, changing things politically as well. There's a lot of hard conversations had on both our sides of the aisle with, 2 colleagues who may have been serving together for 4 or 6 years and have to look at each other and say, who's going to retire? That's a really tough conversation to have. But yeah, it's definitely interesting times. I mean, and the maps will be what the maps be. I mean, the courts have been doing this since 1972. So at this point, it's essentially precedence that the maps are done that way. I think it's one of the best ways you probably can do it. Then we're not having what's going on in Wisconsin right now, which is, hyper political, trying to gerrymander. I'm glad we don't have that here. But yeah, definitely shifting tides with everything moving on. I'm happy the range delegation stayed relatively strong with how the new maps have decided, and I think that was maybe the biggest concern for all of us here in the Northland.
And certainly after redistricting, you see a lot of retirements, and a lot of retirements in northeastern Minnesota already. So seeing a lot of seniority going down and just legislative history. Representative Olson, Duluth seems to have kind of shrunk down to 1 Senate district now with the new map. Do you want to talk about that, or any other thoughts about redistricting?
Sure. And it was the last redistricting cycle, there were 46 retirements. which shows, and I don't know what we're currently at, it feels like that changes every day, but it's somewhere within there, so it feels like a lot, but that's what happens, to the point of like people getting paired together, or people, you know, not wanting to move into a different district if their house is no longer where they were. So there's a lot of decisions to be made. I would say, like, another thing to kind of watch for too that we've noticed, it happened with Senator Melissa Lopez Franzen stepping down when she was paired together. Just the gender balance of what happens in these situations will be interesting to see. You know, we're making ground up in terms of like representation to really reflect the diversity of Minnesota. And if we're able to maintain that with both who steps down and who decides to run, I think will be really important. And in terms of Duluth, so we actually shifted a little bit, but we lost Gary, and part of Gary, New Duluth, and Fond du Lac actually went into a different Senate district. So we're still chopped up, but we're chopped up differently. And so we brought back in two of the precincts that were Senator or Representative Murphy had, that were kind of, so it's different, but yet we're still not all together. Maybe in the next 10 years from now. So I think all in all, it's not much of a shift in terms of that. There wasn't much of a shift needed because we didn't really grow or lose a bunch. But the big news is we'll be, you know, Senator or Representative Schultz will be stepping down and is no longer running. So we'll have a change, makeup will change regardless, even if incumbents were to hold seats, it will look different here, so.
Great. Well, we only have 1 minute left, and I want to get a sentence from both of you about this. And so there's 2 months left of the legislative session. We've gotten great questions from viewers. We couldn't get to all of them today. That's the best way that you guys can find out information. Both of you have said that. Representative Igo, what's the best way that your constituents can get in touch with you in one sentence?
Best way to get a hold of me is by literally Googling my name. Phone number comes up, email comes up, personal cell comes up. Reach out to me. I need to hear from you.
Great. Representative Olson?
Same, I have email, phone, whatever works. It's all on the web, so. Yep.
Great. Well, wonderful. I appreciate you both being here today. And we are out of time. I would like to thank Representative Spencer Igo and Representative Liz Olson for joining us this week. Minnesota Legislative Report will be back next Sunday when we will welcome more legislators from northern Minnesota to answer your questions. For the team at WDSE, WRPT, I'm Tony Sertich. Have a great evening.